everyone, and welcome back to Two Bi Guys. As usual, we have another amazing episode for you. I'm very excited to interview this guest. He is a fan of the podcast. We've interacted a lot. He's been recommended to be on the podcast by our former guest host, Gabriel. So I'm so excited to finally meet him and have him on the show and talk about some politics, among other things. Andrew Reginald Hairston is a civil rights attorney, writer, socialist, proud bisexual man of faith, and doting uncle who divides his time between Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. He is an education justice project director at Texas Appleseed, where he works to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline and fight for equal educational opportunities in the state of Texas, primarily through public policy advocacy. He has also worked as a staff attorney at the Advancement Project and at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, both in Washington, D.C. In 2019, he was named a Law for Black Lives Fellow. He loves, fights for, and writes about Black people. And as I said, he's a fan of this podcast and always one of the first people to like our posts. So I'm very excited. I always see his name pop up before I've even logged off.
Andrew Hairston is back. I don't think I ever go inactive on Instagram.
I love it. You get the ball rolling every time.
Absolutely.
So welcome finally to Two Bi Guys, Andrew, aka Uncle Drew.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob. It's such an honor to be here and to just bring this love to the Two Bi Guys universe, which helped me in my coming out journey considerably.
Oh, interesting. That's awesome. I would love to hear about that and get into that. But you know how we always start. Do I even need to ask the question?
We were laughing about the cute TikToks, right? And I love the one about the introductory question. So yeah, that bio is very complimentary. A little bit more just for the podcast interview. I'm a Black bisexual man of faith. I appreciate that part. And yeah, that feels like really integral to how I move through the world, both as kind of a person who has attempted his hand at electoral politics and as someone who's fighting for racial justice in the 21st century.
Cool. Awesome. And I am assuming, but just to check, you use he, him pronouns?
I really appreciate your thoughtful reflection on this, right? I have no qualms about being identified as a man, but I'm also not tied to manhood as my identity in this like patriarchal way, right? Like totally fine with he, him. I've used he, they on work email signatures. Yeah. I don't want to infringe upon trans folks or non-binary folks, but also recognize that like sexuality, gender is much more complex than we give credit to.
Yeah, cool. It's also like I've been starting to use they, them for people I don't know or like an imaginary person I'm talking about, like a hypothetical. And the more I do it, the more natural it's becoming. And then the more weird it is to hear he and she so often.
Totally.
Even when you don't know the person.
I love that. Yeah. Breaking the binary in every way.
Yeah. So I really want to talk about your social justice work and the law stuff and you ran for office, which we'll talk about, all these amazing things. But let's talk about the bi journey. And you said the podcast was helpful. So it must have been relatively recent for you. So tell us like how you started to realize that and then started to come out. What's the journey been like for you?
So I knew that I was attracted to guys when I was a child, right? And the man of faith part comes into focus when I think about probably being an 11-year-old child and silently praying in my bed, right? Like, don't let me be attracted to men, right? I wouldn't even say it out loud because it was that off limits, right?
Yeah.
And so I just really suppressed it and packed it, tightly in my mind. Went to college and then went to law school right after. Went back to D.C. For a little bit of background, I went to college in D.C. and law school in Louisiana. And then, like you said, returned to D.C. to start my career. And then as I'm just going through my early 20s, right, I'm still exclusively dating women at this point, right, just like kind of trying to make it work. And then I'm like, kind of recognizing these inflection points with men at various points of my growth, right? In high school and college and law school, right? I'm like, oh, maybe I just really thought he was a good friend. I don't
Uh-huh.
have brothers. I thought like maybe he's brother material. And then I got to be about 26 years old, right? And was in San Francisco for a work conference and took an Uber from Alameda to San Francisco downtown and had this Uber driver. I'm not sure the gender of the Uber driver. Probably, if I just think back, probably a trans man. And we're having this amazing conversation, right, about music and just like completely vibing. And my coworkers are dead silent in the back seat, and they're like, and when we got out of the Uber at the hotel, they're like, if we would have stayed in that Uber for 5 more minutes, like absolutely numbers were going to be exchanged from our perspective. And so I get back to DC and I'm like, I think I'm bi. I think I like men, right? I know I like men. I'm going to say it
Mhm.
out loud. And then in true Andrew style, I was like, well, now that I've admitted to myself that I'm bi, it's going to be easy. I'm just going to tell the first man who I think is attractive that, I like him and I'm bi, and then we're going to live happily ever after.
Yeah. How did that
So
work
I
out?
came up to this guy in the coffee shop. I'm like, I think you're very handsome and I'm bisexual. He's like, okay. Pretty much, did not talk after that, but that was,
Wow.
incredibly instrumental in the journey. Uh, Later on in 2018, I told my parents and sister, I'll just kind of keep it there, to spare them some of the negative reflection,
Hmm.
and they just did not have good reactions to it.
Hmm.
So I kind of retreated, inwardly, and then I moved to Austin in 2019, and Two Bi Guys came out in the fall of 2019.
It
And
did.
I was sitting there as I liked every Instagram post right then and do now. I would like be waiting, counting down for the next Two Bi Guys episode, and
Cool.
would just be like, this is articulating such eloquent reflections on gender and sexuality and comporting with my experience so beautifully. And then I got to Labor Day of 2021 and finally tweeted out, this is the best thing that I've written, in my opinion. I'm black, I'm fat, I'm bisexual, I'm a prison abolitionist. That thing went wild, 500 views on the Instagram story. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I know my haters are all up in this thing. But
Uh-huh.
I am free,
Yeah.
And the truth that had been building up to that point, I was 30 years old at that point. I'm like, absolutely, I will just say this unequivocally, it is the truth. And it's
Yeah.
about to guide me into this period of clairvoyance in my life.
That is so awesome. Okay, wait, I have a question, but I also just want to say like thank you for saying that. It's very nice compliments. And I want to put this out there not cuz it's like about me, but it's like when Alex and I started this, we were really like we didn't consider ourselves very eloquent about this stuff. Like we would re-record shit and edit shit, and we were very nervous that we were going to lead people astray because we were not experts on any of this. We were just going through it, and we connected with each other at this support group. And I just so I say that not to say, oh, we were better than we thought, but because for everyone out there, even if you don't think you're quite ready to talk about this stuff, you probably actually are. Because like
Wow.
I mean, I just think like I'm so glad it helped you at that time, even though for me, I look back and I'm like, that was not fully formed, and that was
Wow.
just like kind of rambly, but it helps. And so we all have a lot more power inside us and like stuff inside us, I think, than we give ourselves credit for sometimes. So
And
thank
y'all
you for
just
saying that.
keep getting better and better, but you started at a mountain peak, right? And to see your evolution over 3 years, you and Alex and all of the guests that have come since, right? To see you in real time grappling with these
Yeah,
really difficult concepts, right? And even as we become more sophisticated, we understand that the more that we know, the less that we do, right? But you
exactly.
also just have this earnest introspection and inquisitive nature that I think is creating a beautiful community online.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear.
I think that's going to be the clip that ends up on.
I'm
I'm like,
just
what am I
gonna.
going to share on my Instagram story? I think that's it.
I'll share people praising me. That's great. I love
Absolutely.
it. Okay, so something you said I thought is really interesting. Like now you're free.
Yeah.
You came out and you feel free. So like what makes you say that, and what, looking back, what was it like? Did you realize you weren't free in certain ways, or did you only realize it after, or how did things change actually?
Growing up as a black kid and a black adult in the 20th and 21st centuries, I think I really honed in on this need to be perfect in word and deed, right? To
Hmm.
really nail it, execute it well, to go to school. You know, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I was younger and loved John Grisham books and had a couple of aunts and cousins who were attorneys, but also got to law school, as I mentioned, straight after undergrad and was absolutely exhausted. And, told my parents at one point, I just want to quit and come to Oklahoma where they live. And they're like, well, you've come this far, you should just keep at it. And if you come here, they kind of jokingly said this, you won't have a bed if you don't come with a JD. And I'm appreciative for their push, right? But it very much so encapsulated how I viewed professional and personal pursuits up to that point, right?
Hmm.
It was very much so living for my parents,
Hmm.
right? And I'm glad that I did finish law school, and I'm really glad at how this journey has unfolded. I finished law school in 2016, but coming out as bisexual and just fully accepting the freedom and the lack of giving a fuck that is associated with that, it's like I absolutely don't have to be perfect in that way that I've built up this very unrealistic expectation that I've set up on myself. And I get to just grapple with these concepts that have been building, some truths that I've known, and some questions that I have had since I was younger and now can explore without shame or stigma in my mind.
Yeah.
And, can say it to the world and to my parents, right? And to my sister, and not have any, this sounds callous, any consideration for how people perceive me, but truly, I'm not asking for acceptance. I'm telling you,
Hmm.
and it is what it is at this point. I'm bisexual, right? And if you want to ask me questions and kind of contend with this part of my identity, I'm happy to be that resource. But if you come with dogma or criticism or trying to instill shame, I'm shutting it down.
Yeah.
That freedom
Yeah.
in that just self assuredness has been beautiful in this phase of my life.
That's so cool. Was it like, was the bi thing sort of like the tipping point? Were there other things that you had trouble talking about yourself, or you were self-conscious about, or was this like kind of the big thing? Did it relate to anything else?
That was the big thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're gonna,
Yeah.
people who find this are just gonna love this, family and friends. So I'm theoretically polyamorous, right? But I think I'm fitting the bisexual stereotype that you have twice as many options or more options, right? No, I'm twice as bad at dating. Everybody hates me romantically, right?
No, it's hard.
My best friend Catherine is gonna watch this like Andrew. Don't beat yourself up. But I think it kind of allowed me to understand, as you again and Alex have really dealt with these concepts in real time in a public fashion with us, right? Let me think like, okay, there's so many relationships in my life, right? Maybe there were certain men who I can look back to and say that they sparked some interest in me. But all of these relationships, like a great deal of relationships, right? Friendships and even some social acquaintances, it feels like there are more elements of complexity, right? And there's this ability to not have it fit into this cookie cutter mold.
Right.
And so, like, coming out as bisexual also kind of opened up the possibility of, maybe it's not explicitly named in certain relationships, but, the beauty of humanity in the 21st century is the varying ways in which we can connect with each other,
Yeah.
and maybe not have it fit a mold.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I wasn't trying to lead you, but I did ask that question because I think for me and for many people, I found like my sexuality was like this big thing. It was the biggest, and it was the
Yes.
biggest like fear. And then once I did come out, I almost didn't realize that this would happen, but all these other littler things started feeling easier to be more
Yes.
open about and to be comfortable with whatever I liked. Whether it's like I want to wear more pink clothing or like
Yes.
what music do I like to listen to? Like I suddenly became less ashamed of everything, all these little things, and
Yeah.
more free to express myself however I wanted to.
I loved your
Yeah.
interview with Mimi Wong. All of them,
Yeah.
right? But just like little things, right? Like I'm gonna wear the bisexual pin, right? I'm gonna
Hmm.
wear a little bit more, not ostentatious clothing, right? But just like wear whatever clothing feels right for me, right? It might be a little
Yeah.
flashy. My parents, when I was younger, might have said this is a little bit too showy. We're not gonna let you wear that. But as a 31-year-old bisexual man, I get to absolutely wear and do what I want and show up in the world in ways that make sense to me.
Right.
And I have deepened relationships with men. I have a book idea, some maybe like 25 years down the road, where I write about the men of my life, right? And it'll be
Uh-huh.
kind of like these successive chapters, maybe like, lovers, friends, and then kind of build up to like my cousins, uncles, and my father, and just be like, even as I've come out and said the thing that is, unforgivable, right? That I'm queer, that I'm bisexual, right? In this season of my life, I've been able to build on these relationships with these men in a way that has been so pleasantly unexpected
Hmm.
and I think deeply gratifying.
So, if you follow our social media, you have probably already heard this exciting news, but I got a book deal for my oral history about bi married men. I'm very excited. I'm also very nervous to actually write the rest of the book because I only wrote part of it as a proposal. And I have to really sit down and write the rest of it and do some more interviews. But I'm extremely excited and I can't wait to share these stories with you. There's a few of them that I recorded like 2 years ago, and I'm dying to share them. I really found them fascinating. They helped me so much in my journey. If you're interested in participating and you didn't see the links, there's a link in our link tree for a form to fill out. I only need a few more interviews now, but I would love to have a database of bi married men because I hope this is an ongoing project for the future. Anyway, I bring this up because right around the time I got the book deal, like really, I think it was that day, I received a sample of this product that I am really enjoying and really has helped me get started on the book. It's called Magic Mind, and it's a tiny little sort of energy drink. It's almost like a little shot. It's got some really wild stuff in it. And honestly, I've been very pleasantly surprised by how well it's worked and how much it's helped me like focus and concentrate, but not feel jittery. So, Magic Mind recommends you take the shot with or soon after your first morning cup of coffee. And like, I drink so much coffee. I need it when I wake up. I feel very weird without it. And then I have a few cups throughout the day. Maybe 3 or 4 cups. That's down from what it once was when I was working in an office every day. I would be drinking coffee at 7 p.m. I've thankfully got it down, but I still, in the afternoon sometimes need that energy. But I also, when I drink too much coffee, I don't like the way it makes me feel. I get acid reflux, I get those jitters. So Magic Man says try it with your first cup of coffee and you won't need those extra cups after. And like, I was skeptical. I will be honest, I was skeptical, but I decided to give it a try. I got this sample and it's true. Like it really worked. I had that morning cup, which wakes me up and, I'm probably kind of addicted to it and I need it when I wake up. And then I had the Magic Mind shot, and I really didn't feel like I needed any more coffee the rest of the day. And this was right when I got the book deal. So I like wanted to get started and get a jump start and like accomplish a bunch that first week. And I got so much done. I was really focused. I could keep going throughout the day and I didn't need as many like breaks. And I didn't need the coffee. I didn't get the jitters. I just felt like normal and clear and awake and like focused on what I was doing. I don't really know how it works. It's kind of magic. I guess that's why they call it Magic Mind. It does seem like magic. It's got nootropics and adaptogens. Don't know what that is, but it's cool. It has matcha in it, which has much less caffeine than coffee, but sort of extends the benefits of the caffeine. I have been really impressed with Magic Mind. I really like it. I'm going to keep using it. I'm getting more, and I'm going to probably use it every day and see if I can cut down on coffee and be more focused in my work. So if you, like me, have struggled with focus or staying awake or drinking too much coffee, I highly recommend it. And you should try out the sample pack or get a month's worth. I also have a 20% off code to share with you guys. It is BIGUYS20. That's BIGUIS, the number 20. To use it, you go to www.magicmind.co, not .com, .co, /buyguys, BIGUIS. That's www.magicmind.co /buyguys. Use the code BuyGuys20. If you use it to get a subscription, it's 40% off for the next 10 days. So if you use that code in the next 10 days and get a subscription, it's 40% off. Highly recommend. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. I think, like me, you will be pleasantly surprised at how well it works. Tell us more about that. And also, you mentioned dating. So tell us about, like, in general, relationships in your life since coming out. Like, how has it changed? What's been positive? Have you had negative experiences related to your sexuality?
Yes. So I've never had a boyfriend to this day, right? And I've tried to make that thing happen. I have had some really passionate lovers, right? I've really been able to explore this kind of untapped energy in that regard, particularly with men, since I came out going on 4.5 years ago. But also have explored deeper connections with women, right? And for a long time, almost in my mind, in this like formulaic lawyer way, I was like, well, I've suppressed the attraction to men for so long that I'm going to exclusively focus on it. But in 2022, I've kind of opened up the realm of possibility that, connections with women are still very much so a part of my attraction and how I move through the world. And quite often, even when it doesn't lead to a physical connection with women, it will be this incredibly gratifying emotional connection, right? And will be something, even if we choose not to date, right, will be a foundation for a good, friendship moving forward or deeper relationship. I wrote a short story recently and won a contest for my local coffee shop in East Austin, where I live, about the absolute nadir of my dating life. When I post this on Instagram, I'll share another link to the story. But basically, met this woman. I'm like, damn, how deep am I gonna go in this story on this interview? But like, met this woman in March and April of 2022, and it was an absolute whirlwind for like truly 30 days, and then led in this very tangible betrayal, in an intimate setting. And both was just like so shocking in the moment, but also very clarifying on what boundaries I was going to set forth in my personal life from that point on. And I had also a couple of years ago had this experience with a guy who was just very manipulative and took advantage, right? And it's like, okay, these two experiences together from 2020 to 2022 have formed the basis for maybe not always getting it right, but having some base expectations and realizing at this point in my bisexual journey that I am bringing things to the table to potential romantic partners or connections I make that are worth me seeing the reciprocity in
Uh-huh.
how I'm treated. And yeah, so at this point, I'm single. This will be another tag. Two bi guys universe, coming to my DMs, tell me I'm handsome, say you're coming to Austin for South by,
Yeah, hear that, everyone?
take you to my favorite drink spot.
Yeah,
But even in the pain of dating, since coming out as bi, it's been very, very beautiful in
yeah,
the lessons imparted.
yeah. It is. I mean, we don't have to go into it, but I do think it is important to talk also about negative relationships we've had, because those can form our identity and how we negotiate boundaries and consent. And like, actually, one of the women I dated right before I came out, it was a very bad
Yeah.
relationship for me. She was didn't want to let me leave the relationship, and
Were
it
you
got
out
it
as
got pretty
bi
bad.
to her?
No, and I
Okay.
wasn't even really out to myself, but
Right.
afterwards I just kind of was afraid to date women for a little while
Totally.
after that, because she like faked a pregnancy with me to try to keep me in the relationship. It was quite abusive,
Wow.
not physically but verbally.
Thank you for
And
sharing.
yeah, and it really was, I mean, it was not fun, but it was part of how I began exploring my sexuality, and it really, had a negative immediate impact, but sort of led to some interesting developments. Do
Yeah.
you want to share more of what happened with your story? Should we just
Yeah,
direct people to
I'll
the
share both the guy and the gal, right? So with the guy, and there felt this sense of shame at this point because this was in 2020 before I was out publicly. I was out to
right?
like a few select friends and family, and so I think he was able to capitalize on that and say, well, there's still some sense of shame that Andrew feels about his sexuality. Knew him from my college days, right? Reconnected when I was in California for a work trip. And then as the pandemic settled in, it was like very clear that he was job insecure, right? And needed some material support. And
Mm-hmm.
so I created a pathway for him to come to Austin and move into my apartment, right? And it was one of these kind of like overpriced 1 bedroom apartments in South Austin. If any listeners are familiar with the geography, and they kind of required that any non-related person would be added to your lease. And so like that was another element of it. Within like 4 weeks of being in that situation or less, I kind of realized the mistake I had made and kind of took corrective steps to get out of that. But I also understand how that could have gone a different way, right? And I was pretty adamant about certain protocols, like it's early in the pandemic, only me and you need to be in the space, right? We still don't
Mm-hmm.
know, what COVID-19 fully is, right? Two and a half
Mm-hmm.
years later, we still don't fully know. But he was just kind of flouting that rule, I guess, like meeting folks on Tinder and like bringing them in. It was just wild, right?
Yeah.
But I was glad to extricate myself from that. And then with the woman, it was basically like kind of recognize my kind heartedness. And this is where the faith comes in, right? I really strive to be a person who is, particularly in relationship to other black people, always showing the utmost solidarity. I know how fucking hard it is. I know how, very recently, within the past year, have driven Lyft and Uber to make ends meet, even as I'm, a salaried
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit employee. I know how hard it is. But recognized, I think in me, this woman recognized in me this benevolence that is kind of unchecked, right?
Yeah.
If I kind of judge you worthy, even in an initial meeting, then you will get some material benefits from me, right? And so that kind of flowed, right? I think she was in a similar position where like job was a little unstable. She ended up getting an hourly position somewhere in our courtship. But I'm willing to open my home and buy food and transport her to and from her father's house where she was staying. And then it ended. So sorry to friends listening, but it ended up with her, fucking two guys within a 24-hour period of this weekend that she was like staying in my house, like had all of her shit here. I'm, very sex positive, right? Like have sex with whom you want, whenever you want. But when it is truly on my dime, and when you have not even kind of tried out the next 6 hours where you're like, oh, I just like fuck this dude. Andrew left, because he was in the living room when we snuck off to fuck. And then I'm texting Andrew the next morning, like, is it okay for me to come get my stuff? It's like, maybe think about that before.
Yep.
You bring it out of me, Rob. I was like, damn, I'm gonna be good today and not talk about the most, intimate things of 2022. But no,
that's what I do. I
yes.
I pick up on the stuff that's in the margins of like what we're comfortable talking about, and like that's what I like to talk about.
And I'm very glad coming off of Bi Visibility Month, right? Coming off of September, right? Like it is so beautiful to see all these glorious bi plus people sharing their truth with the world, but also highlighting within the month the deep pain that we go through, the domestic violence, the mental health struggles, right? Uh, one kind of small thing. My mother has gotten a little bit better over the past year of saying one of her kind of exhortations is that I'm praying for you, a wife, right? And she would say that a lot leading up to me coming out as bi. And she's been a bit better over the past like 6 months or so, saying like I'm praying for your person, for a spouse, right? But it's kind of recently reverted back just slightly to like, oh, when you find a woman, when you find a wife, I'm like, yeah, or a husband or a spouse, right? So to think about Bi Visibility Month just passed, right? Like it's the 360-degree experience, right? It's the beauty of claiming this part of yourself that I'm sure at some point any of us felt stigma, deep shame about. But also saying when you do come out, it's rarely fully easy.
Right. Well, you mentioned at the beginning, it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that, I mean, I feel exactly that way. Like I've done almost 50 episodes of this podcast, learned so many things and talked about so many things. And sometimes I feel like more confused than ever because there's always another layer and a new thing to consider. And so, it's hard.
And then my passion for love, right? I'm amazed that people are like, oh yeah, I've been in love like 2 or 3 times in my life. I'm like, I've been in love 2 or 3 times this month.
Yeah.
Baby, I fall in love when I turn right on the corner going to my coffee shop. And then they're like, oh, this motherfucker, But letting that like really earnest spirit of benevolence and love lead me, right? And I don't know at this point, right, whether I'll be long-term partnered or end up married, right? But kind of know that there's this inherent spirit that has been made clear by my bisexuality and naming that to the world, that there is truly limitless love.
Cool.
And I get to lean into that in whatever way makes sense to me over the decades to come.
That's so awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of love to give, and like there's so much joy that comes with that. And then there can be people that take advantage of that, and we have to learn boundaries and negotiations. But I like that limitless love idea. You mentioned your faith, which is a good segue.
Yes.
I want to talk about your faith. Tell us a little about your faith background and how has it intersected with your bi identity
Yeah.
after coming out? And also, is your faith connected to your identity as a Black man? And how
Yeah.
does that all intersect?
I will start this answer with my parents, right, who are Black Southerners who were raised in the Baptist tradition. My mother finished grad school in Houston in the mid 80s and then moved to North Carolina to start her career and joined this Baptist church in Winston-Salem, where my father was born and raised. And she started teaching Sunday school, right? I was telling the story the other day and smiling so hard, and he sat in on one of the lessons that she gave. He's a young associate minister at this point. And he comes up to her after she finishes and he's like, "Are you a philosopher?" I'm like, "This is why I fall in love 2 or 3 times a month." These folks already knew in the late 80s as they got together, right? So my father has been a minister for 35 years.
Wow.
And as I was a young child, we moved throughout the country as children, me and my sister. We were both born in North Carolina and then lived in Indiana, Missouri, and Ohio. For the moves from North Carolina to Indiana and then Indiana to Missouri, these were career changes for my mother. But then Missouri to Ohio and then Ohio to Oklahoma, where my parents now reside, were for pastoral callings for my father. And so I had these really beautiful experiences with Black churches across the country, especially in the Midwest. And then, from second to sixth grade, I actually went to private Catholic school in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. I'm reflecting on this now, all these years later, if that made me as radical as I am, or maybe, in spite of
Right. Rebelling
this
against
private
it.
education, I'm radical. But it led me to deeply leaning into faith, right? When I was in undergrad, when I was in law school, kind of continued joining the churches of my father's divinity school classmates during that probably 7 year period of my life. And then when I moved to Austin, it was pretty clear that I wanted to join a historic Black church and keep that going. There probably was just a little bit of a tension in 2019, right? Because again, I'm out to myself, but not out publicly. And it's like,
Right.
if I join this church, which I did join a Reconstruction era church that's operated since 1875 on the east side of Austin, there will be a very particular, perhaps, expectation of how I show up in the world, right? But then I run for office when I'm 30 years old, and I'm in the paper, the local periodical, saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm a Black bisexual man," right? And not giving a fuck who reads it, right? And I'm like, sure, my fellow congregants are saying this, right? And as you
Uh-huh.
saw on my website and across social media, I don't hide it from anyone at this point. You'll
Yeah.
see "bi" somewhere on every social tag.
Right.
But even, as I went through that campaign and lost, right, there was this affirmation from the church and this kind of ability to hold me down. I think despite, what's on the public record at this point, right, this kind of taboo topic. And, the amazing thing, Rob, of the past 6 weeks is that my pastor reached out and asked me to join the deacon board at the church. So I'm now tomorrow I'm going to my third deacon training, as a deacon of Ebenezer Third Baptist Church. And in church these days I don't lead with it. I wouldn't hide it if it came up, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's plastered everywhere from my point of view, right? And they're like, still, you get to be in one of the most significant spiritual leadership positions of this church because we see how you are. We see you're a man of the people, of community.
Mm-hmm.
We see that you're showing up in ways that we think Jesus Christ would have showed up
Right.
2,000 years ago,
Right.
like as a socialist, as a person attacking the empire, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to honor that even if we don't fully understand or haven't fully wrapped our heads around that aspect of your identity.
Right.
But we're still going to trust this leadership that you're displaying.
That's certainly a great first step of that community to take. I mean, like of that acceptance and willingness to engage and listen. And it also sounds like you're providing a really positive example of like just by being yourself of like
Yeah,
what bisexuality or queerness is. Because I think people think it's this other thing
right.
so often, and you're just kind of showing them like it's this aspect of you that can fit with everything else that the church values.
That makes me that more loving, that more
Yeah.
able to remember your birthday, your anniversary. I'm the ultimate. You're gonna get a card in the mail if you give me your address.
Sure.
And you know, makes me this effusively community driven person I am. And it's
Right. Right.
absolutely not an aspect of shame for any of us.
Right.
It
Right. Well,
makes
I
us all
think
stronger. Go ahead.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I think it is a great first step, like what you're describing and what's going on. But I also think a lot of the things you're describing that came with your by awareness and coming out and this idea of limitless love
mm,
actually shows how much of an asset queerness can be to religion. And
yeah,
the few kind of queer religious uh scholars we've talked to on here, like
Benjamin
it
Perry.
yeah, like Benjamin Perry is who I'm
Yeah,
thinking of. It's like it isn't just something to be accepted, but actually it can like advance the religion and the community. And so I think you're on your way there, it
what a
sounds like.
gift.
Yeah. Have you found much like actual explicit queerness in a faith-based community, or also like Black queer community? Have you found either of those in Texas,
Man,
or is that difficult?
you know, I'm like, give it 5 years, right? And you know, I'm
I would
like,
imagine it's hard to find, to be honest, especially
hard to
in
find,
Texas.
but like, y'all come on in. The water's fine, right? Like, I ain't shit. I'm like thinking of like specific folks, like in my faith community. I'm like, come on in. The water's fine. Like, there's beauty and
Yeah.
love and acceptance here, and the ability to be yourself more fully, right? But yeah, explicitly Black queer faith communities, right? I think it's a real kind of lacking aspect of life in Texas in 2022. But you know, more and more, you know, with each passing year, it feels like the possibilities are there.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing whatever work you do in that space.
I'll be delivering a speech with my bi flag and my like my sermonic reflection as a deacon. You know, I'm a
Yeah.
bisexual
Awesome.
deacon.
Awesome.
You know,
Cool. And now, a word from our sponsor, FirmTech. You may have seen this post on our social media, but I wanted to give them a shout out here because I am enjoying this product as well. It's called the FirmTech. It is a Fitbit for your dick. It is essentially a very flexible cock ring, easy on, easy off. That also connects to an app, the FirmTech app, which can track your firmness, the duration of your climax, and other things. It's doctor developed. It is not just for people experiencing ED. It's for everyone who wants to keep track of things, see how healthy you are down there. And I think it can be really good for bi people. If, like me, you have struggled with performance anxiety or any kind of performance issue, this can definitely help. It takes some of the pressure off you. You know you could stay harder longer. And unlike some other closed loop cock rings that kind of scare me, to be honest, this one is so easy to get on and off. You will never get trapped inside. Maybe you don't deal with that anxiety, but I do. So I really like this one. In addition to the tech ring, which connects to the app, there's also the more affordable performance ring. Provides all the benefits of the tech ring minus the tech. It puts pressure in the right spot to allow you to stay firmer longer. And we're doing a giveaway of one of these to one of our listeners. If you follow Two Bi Guys and also follow My Firm Tech, that's at My Firm Tech on Instagram, and then comment in that post we did about this, tag a friend. I'll be picking one of those commenters at random who tagged a friend, and you will get a free Firm Tech. So check it out. The link is also in our link tree. You can purchase one from that link. Enjoy. let's talk about your work. And you
Yeah,
mentioned a little about like high expectations of you growing up, and that kind of led you to law school. So, what's it been like since then? Like, how
yeah,
did you kind of decide to focus your career on civil rights and abolition, and
yeah.
what does that actually look like in your life? How has that played out?
Totally. So I knew I was going to be a lawyer or wanted to be a lawyer when I was a child, but kind of envisioned being a public defender or a criminal defense attorney as I went into law school. And was even going to team up with an aunt of mine, my mother's youngest sister, who lives in Northeast Louisiana where they grew up, and maybe kind of take on criminal defense work that way. But then in 2014, as I'm entering my second year of law school, Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. And that resonated for me because my parent, sister, and I lived in Florissant, Missouri, an adjacent suburb to Ferguson, for about 6 years, from 1998 to 2004. And so it got the gears turning. I'm like, well, criminal defense is certainly meritorious calling, right, and very worthy. But perhaps I could do more work that could impact this perniciously evil system, right,
Hmm.
of police murdering black people. And so I thought of this church that I attended while I was at Howard, and the associate minister who was also the general counsel of Advancement Project, and messaged him on Facebook and said, "Well, Rev, if you have any opportunities for internships, I'd be very interested." Summer 2015, and he put me in touch with the staff attorneys who were running the program, and the rest is history. As I got to DC and interned for Advancement Project, I really fell in love with this work. Then and now, they focus on voter protection, right? Kind of extension of the franchise to folks who have been shut out, formerly incarcerated people, and folks on probation and parole. But also the opportunity to learn, right? Dismantling the school to prison pipeline, which you so grandly described in my bio, but also putting forth the affirmative equal educational opportunities, right? These schools where, black and brown children, LGBTQ young people, and kids with disabilities can be free of arbitrary standardized tests and can be free of the fear of racially discriminatory school closings. And, in Texas, like the impact of environmental racism and this lack of investment in the physical infrastructure of the school, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That can prevent the best learning outcomes. And so I kept doing that work throughout this internship, knew that I wanted to come back to DC for a bit, at least a few years after law school. And then that led to the Lawyers Committee and the Advancement Project staff attorney roles. What is so interesting, Rob, I am almost a year removed from a very anti-black investigation by the Texas Board of Law Examiners, where I'll share with the listeners. If you go to DC as a lawyer for more than 90 days and you have a physical office in DC, you have to apply for the DC bar. It is clear cut and dry in the DC rules. But so many lawyers in DC will go up with state bar membership elsewhere, right? Like me, I took the Louisiana bar right after I finished law school in Louisiana, passed it, and went up to work. And will use their state bar membership to engage in work in whatever jurisdiction, and also use a mechanism called pro hoc vice special admission, where you just use a lawyer's bar card in that jurisdiction to practice. And the Texas Board of Law Examiners, as I pretty much started the application for the Texas bar when I moved to Texas in 2019, over a 2 year period, gradually argued that because I hadn't applied for the DC bar, I had engaged in the unauthorized practice of law from 2016 to 2019 and had displayed fraud, misrepresentation, and deceit.
Wow.
Homeboy,
Why?
I got this letter in June 2021. I was like, what? My boss at Texas Appleseed very graciously got me a lawyer who I, still had to pay for. And my parents and niece, I can get into this a little bit more, but my parents and niece came down from Oklahoma to Austin in November 2021. My aunt came up from Houston and watched my niece in the vestibule. And my parents and I sat in this 90-minute hearing where the primary question is, does this man fundamentally have the character of practice law? I tell this story in this way for two reasons, right? It fortified my commitment to racial justice advocacy because the personal experience, I tell you, Rob, aside from not applying for the DC bar, I had dotted every I and crossed every T. I had done
Yeah.
everything right. I had gone to school. I had engaged in my career. I had this sense of altruism and how I showed up in my professional and personal lives. And they are like, we are going to hone in on you, make you pay thousands of dollars in legal fees for, after the hearing concluded, the 3-judge panel to within 15 minutes say, oh, he is unanimously certified to practice law in the state of Texas.
Good.
Why the fuck did you waste our time?
Yeah. Why? Why did they? Why is there an answer?
Rob, I went to 2 of their meetings this year. You can do public comment for 2 minutes in any kind of state government meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I went up in that thing in March and June, Rob, and they knew my fat ass. They saw me coming from 2 miles away. I would say this is the most anti-black racism that I have ever experienced, and I'm a civil rights lawyer.
Yeah.
Y'all don't like black people. And I don't care that y'all have the Rainbow Coalition up in here, a black woman general counsel, an Asian American staff attorney. This is a systemic issue, which you identified in this letter that you sent to me, that I fight the school prison pipeline. I fight barriers to access to the ballot box. Y'all are racist. Sit with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And wait on me to sue you at some point. Just let me get my records together.
Yeah.
But it also, Rob, this was 2 months after I came out publicly. Oh. And I'll go into this more as well, but I blocked my parents and sister for the month of September 2021. Because again, when I came out publicly, they did not have good reactions. And I told them to be methodical in how they responded, because as I shared earlier, this is a statement. This is not a request for acceptance. But then, Rob, basically, at that point, they were a month unblocked. And these folks, my parents, who I love with all of my heart, right, even when we're fighting, had to come down. And even as they are dealing with this deep spiritual uncertainty, right, because they feel like in their minds it's wrong. Mm-hmm. They're like, this man who we gave birth to in 1991, his character, his impeccable character, and both of my parents offered these beautiful reflections in the hearing.
Wow.
And really affirmed that, this is our child. Mm-hmm. This is our son. The doting uncle, the arbiter of family conflict, right? Our pro bono lawyer. He is absolutely willing and able and capable to practice law in an ethical way. And so all of that substantive knowledge has built really for 7 years since I interned at Advancement Project. And then truly over the course of the pandemic, Rob, these personal inflection points with my bar hearing, with me coming out publicly, is like, oh, not only am I advocating for this in a professional sense, but truly the personal is political. And I'm able to bring myself fully into my work because I've been through the bullshit.
Right.
And come out on the other side.
Right. Yeah, that is amazing that it was all happening right at the same time. And it's kind of even though it must have felt like a lot to be going through at once, it's kind of nice you got that validation from your family.
Wow.
Embracing all of you, even at this sort of moment they might have been unsure.
And Rob, it's not perfect, but like this 11-month period with my parents, right? Like, I mean, we don't fully get each other all the time, the three of us, but like these, deep reflections. Usually my father and I talk about politics. He's like, boy, when is Trump going to go to jail? I'm like,
yeah, good question.
I'm like, damn, technically a prison abolitionist, but
for, for some people.
but they're a piece of shit. And then my mother, who even when I over the past 31 years have had disagreements with my mother, as anyone will with their parents. I'm like, my mother is like this angelic force of good. I just, admire her deeply.
Aw.
And it has allowed, to that point earlier, of deepened authentic relationships to let that flow between my parents and me, because there's is that less shame and stigma.
Yeah, cool. I want to ask a quick question about abolition and
Yes.
defunding the police. Just because, like, I was reading a little on your something you wrote, but I'm curious, like, when a lot of the opponents of abolition or defunding the police will say, like, well, you need something in its place. You
Right.
can't just get rid of this thing. And it's always like, yeah, obviously there is stuff to come in. So, like, I read on your site, you're talking about getting police officers out of
Yeah.
schools and replacing them with more school counselors and more
Yeah.
appropriate resources that will actually benefit the kids and not just treat them as criminals. So can you
Yeah.
talk a little about that, and like, what does abolition or
Yeah.
defunding actually look like in reality? Because it's not just suddenly the prisons disappear.
Right. Right. Certainly it's twofold, right? It is indeed the absence of these death making institutions, right? Where policing in the US has its direct ascending line from slave patrols, the protection of white people's private property, and union busting, which in some form or fashion American policing does in the 21st century. And then prisons, which are en masse sites of deep sexual violence, homicide, the prisons themselves, because of this violence that has been allowed to flow through them, especially since I'd say 1980 in the US. So it's the absence of those things, but it's the presence of life giving resources that every human being needs and deserves: healthcare, education, housing, that you don't have to pay for,
Mm-hmm.
art, culture. Every human being deserves and needs in some form of fashion that literature, that music, that painting, that sculpture, to show you that your individual experience is your own, but that you are a part of a collective species. And the thing with abolitionists, right? We recognize the existence of harm within the human condition, right? That as human beings we will cause violence and endure it. But we argue, and I think if folks really were to contend with this political praxis, if you put those life giving resources in place, you are going to significantly diminish the likelihood that the worst harm is going to occur from human being to human being.
Yeah.
A burglary, a robbery? Why I gotta go into your house for? I have a house.
Right.
I have food. I have resources. I have what I need. And I'm living in abundance in this world truly without policing and prisons, right?
Yep.
But because you have met all of your material needs, you can then move forward in the kind of tougher emotional work that's needed to actualize abolition, right? Where if you recognize that all human beings will cause and endure harm, then when it happens, what is the space created to talk about, oh, you hurt me?
Right.
And not just a passing, fleeting way. Like, this was a deep harm. And oh, I hurt you in a deep way, right?
Right.
And you kind of create the space for those conversations to lead to accountability, acknowledgement, right? And hopefully repair the harm so that it doesn't occur in the exact same way.
Right.
And so it feels like with police out of schools, after George Floyd, there was a resource published called 8toabolition.com. And this was one of the tenets of it, was police out of schools. And this feels like a very tangible, material way to get toward that abolitionist future, where policing in schools, generally in American history, in recent history, like not that far back. And, folks can kind of think of a time, certainly after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, and now let's say Santa Fe, Parkland, and Uvalde, there are these inflection points where, the narrative gets complicated with school shootings.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at Uvalde and 400 police officers were in and around that building. And still this man was able to perpetrate the crime.
Yep.
So, I think folks feel because of their deep investment in their children, right? Whether they are their biological children or children in their community, and the idea that even folks like a couple of generations removed from us, right? Our parents and grandparents can think of a time when they were in school without heavy militarized police forces.
Yeah.
And and kids fight, right? And kids disagree, but you go to the principal's office.
Yeah.
Your assistant principal helps out, right? And then you move forward.
Yeah. Well, it's like I love everything you're saying. I mean, it's going to be such hard work in this political climate, but it's like we obviously need a society with accountability and
Yeah.
hopefully like restorative justice, as opposed to right now that our culture just seems to have this knee-jerk reaction to punish people and to
Yes.
criminalize and other people and use these very hard hands of justice. And like the policing and prison system costs so much money.
Wow.
It's not like we have to do that. Like if we redirect those resources, we may not even need like so much policing, so many prisons. And it requires like a total shift in the way you think about the world, because most of us were brought up with policing and prisons, and it just is like, oh, that's how you solve this. And I always say this, but I think it's like a kind of a uniquely queer, not uniquely, but it's kind of a queer bi thing to be able to imagine a completely new way of having accountability and justice in our society that doesn't so much involve like these harsh punishments, but actually involves addressing the root of these issues. And yeah, like if everyone had a universal basic income, would people need to steal from other people or harm other people? Certainly not to the same degree.
No. A Black bisexual woman, Marsha P. Johnson at Stonewall, said, "Fuck the police."
Yeah.
And for over 50 years, us queer folks have followed in her tradition and say the police absolutely have no fucking place in Pride.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your reflection just now to think about harm, right? And it is the reality that individuals will harm each other and endure harm themselves. But when you are harmed in this incredibly violent culture that is American society, there is this push to say that you are responsible for the harm that you cause in a vacuum. You have seen American militarism. Even Dwight Eisenhower said, y'all, the military is getting a little bit too big. And you have seen the exporting of violence for over half a century and longer across the world. Even if you don't see it materially as a person living domestically in the U.S., you know the expansive reach of the U.S. military. You know how that trickles down into policing and prison practices in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say these folks did these violent things, right, and not to excuse, violence in the form of sexual violence or homicide, right? What society did it occur in? One that deprives people of their material needs, blames them for it, and then says, "Good luck."
Yeah.
And you gotta survive somehow. You're probably gonna live, as we calculate, 80 years, but you're gonna live 80 years without the material needs of human life.
Right.
You can't divorce this violence from the society. And this is another beautiful call of abolition, right? That not only if you put the resources in place, right, but start this transformation of society, then you will get to this place where we can say, we are truly responsible for each other, and we really hold each other in care, even when we hurt each other.
Yeah.
And we can kind of move forward with this recognition of everyone's humanity.
Perfect segue into talking about a little politics, because
Yes.
what you just said is really like a radical reimagining of how this society could function, and I think we need it, because I'm very nervous about where we're headed at the moment, and I'm very nervous about where we're headed in a couple weeks. And we'll
Yes.
talk. Everyone needs to vote. This is coming out the day before the final day you can vote, which is November 8th. Hopefully you voted already, but if you haven't, please vote. So I'm nervous. But I want to ask you, before we talk about this, the
Yeah.
midterms, like, all of that is, a radical reimagining of everything, which is, I'm guessing, part of why you identify as a socialist and
Yeah.
ran for office as a socialist. So tell us why you identify that way, and about the campaign you ran for justice of the peace
Yes.
in Texas.
For folks who are only listening to audio, I just held up my planner and I put my I voted stickers on there from today. I voted on October 24th and got rained on so they wouldn't stick to my shirt.
Oh.
But we have these like cool new ones in Travis County with bluegrass. My political evolution has been fascinating, Rob. I was like very enthusiastic to vote for Hillary in the primary and the general in 2016. I thought that Bernie was a crotchety old man who was just throwing a wrench in the political machine, which he was.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That was pretty good.
All of those things are true.
we love to hear it.
Yeah.
But even as I progressed through, at that point I was 25 and wrapping up law school and moving back to DC. I still kind of saw, as I voted in primaries and general elections from 2016, even to 2020, I'd go for establishment Dem candidates, right? Kind of recognizing in spaces like DC and Texas where I was voting that, it is much better than the fascist alternatives, through the GOP.
Mm-hmm.
But got to a point in 2019 where I'm like, my political evolution at work is showing me that I believe in a society where children are given the utmost care, where the resources are put in place, right, and where you don't have to pay for the necessities of life. And it's like, oh, okay, more and more like these are socialist tendencies, right? And then I get to Austin, and when I moved, there was, which has just come up in the 2022 Supreme Court term, the case of Rodney Reed, who is a black man from Bastrop, about 30 miles from Austin, on death row, has worked its way through the state and federal court system in various capacities over the past 20 years. But at the time that I moved to Austin, he was really close to getting executed. And so I ended up at a couple of rallies, and I'm like, fuck the death penalty, and capital punishment has to go. And I ended up with members of the Democratic Socialists of America Austin chapter, just like at these rallies, right? And, we just like started talking, and I go to coffee with some of them, right? We're just getting to know each other as friends and in a political context. The pandemic hits, and some of those relationships fell off for a bit. But during the pandemic, the incumbent I ran for justice of the peace in precinct 1 of Travis County. This judge received pretty bad press attention from the Washington Post about not scrupulously applying the tenets of the CDC eviction moratorium in place at the time. And this is like the heart of 2020. And I reconnected with one of the guys in particular who I had met at Rodney Reed protest and kind of just stayed in touch with. And in like the summer of 2021, he's like, Andrew, we've been looking at this race. I've checked your registration. You're in the precinct. I think you should run for office. And at the time, the story was kind of like, because of the bad press attention and the fact that she had been in for 3 terms at that point, that she was thinking about retiring. And I'm like, okay, well, that could be a good segue into electoral politics, right? Be her chosen
Mm-hmm.
successor. But as I reached out toward the end of summer 2021, through the State Bar of Texas website, she's like, "Oh, Mr. Hairston, I actually just decided to run one more time." And I'm like, "Damn, okay. Well, we have already started this infrastructure building, right? I became a card carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America in August 2021. Still proud card carrying
Cool.
member. And I'm like, let's do this, you know? Bernie ran for office when he was 30.
Yeah.
Now I had a similar result to Bernie. Bernie got 1,500 votes in a 1972 U.S. Senate race in Vermont, and I got about 3,300 votes to her 12,000 for justice of the peace. But man,
Following in Bernie's footsteps. Start following his footsteps. Yeah.
Rob, just think about me in 2072. Just think about
Yeah.
the king
President
making.
Hairston.
Now, if you meet my parents, they're gonna love you. They'll be like, "Oh, President, Drew, even with your bi-socialist, abolitionist ass, you still gonna be the president." But I'm also glad that you set the framework for where we are politically in the United States, right? So I expect, right, no state Dems will win in Texas, right? My final prediction is 53%, 47% in favor of Abbott, right? And I'm very excited about my congressperson who will be sworn in for the 118th Congress, Greg Kazar, a Latino man around my age who, is also a socialist. But yeah, I think our state prospects are pretty slim. And I don't want to sound cynical at all or pessimistic, but Rob, as of October 24th, 2022, I think we're going to see a rematch in 2024 of the 2020 presidential contest, and it's going to go the opposite way.
Very scary.
Very scary.
Yeah. Well, so okay. I mean, despite that, everyone
Yeah.
needs to vote, and I'm
Vote,
nervous
y'all.
about losing the midterms and what
Right.
happens in that 2024 election, even if Joe Biden gets more votes than the other person. If we don't control the House, I'm
Yeah.
afraid of what happens, and so that's why this midterm is so important for me. But it does
Yeah.
just feel like there isn't the urgency that
Right.
there was 2 years ago. And also your story is like, it's very hard in general to change the status quo and to
Yeah.
get incumbents out who are not representing people well just because people know their name and they vote for them. And I don't know what gives you hope. Is there anything that gives you some hope in this moment?
Yes. To match my abolitionist politics with my foray into electoral politics, I was just at the University of Texas Law School this afternoon speaking to a class and quoted one of my revered mentors. She doesn't know that she's my mentor, Miriam Kaba, who's a prison abolitionist in New York, who often says that hope is a discipline. And I think it's a beautiful meditation on this pandemic era and, whatever comes after it. And the long game of this work, right, across decades and centuries, right? That in certain respects, as, queer folks, let's say, right, we have been fighting for liberation for decades, for centuries, right? And we are building on the successes and the heartbreaks of those who came before us while dealing with our own successes and heartbreaks. But queer folks will look to us in 2072 and say, Rob Cohen and Andrew Hairston were doing the damn thing. And January 6th, 2021 happened, and Trump was still running around in 2022, and all of these moving pieces, white supremacy remains unaddressed largely in the U.S. But people are laboring, making the connections both in history and in the present moment, right? Creating this framework where even, let's say, with the Dobbs decision and so many abortion bans in place throughout the U.S. in 2022, folks are organizing, supporting their abortion funds, saying unequivocally, like me, I'm pro-abortion, right? Anytime, any
Mm-hmm.
reason, and it is your fundamental divine human right. And people are able to say that with, I'd argue, less shame than they had in 1972,
Mm-hmm.
1973, right? Certainly abortions were happening as queer people existed, right? As all these social occurrences were in place. But with each, passing epoch, we have more of an opportunity to talk candidly about who we are and how that fits into the grand human struggle for justice and equality. So, answer more succinctly, what gives me hope, it really is the eternal struggle to
Yeah.
know that you do your work in your time, to kind of paraphrase Ella Baker, another community organizer I revere. And then when you die, you pass along your records,
Yeah.
and people will carry the mantle.
I really like that because sometimes I think of how much there is to be done. And I just think, I can't help with any of that. Like, I can't do all that. And there's so much to change the political culture and all the disinformation. And, but I really appreciate what you said because it's like we can only do what we can do and do
Mm,
something. Like something over nothing, and if every person is doing their part, it may not fix everything, but it's the only way. If we're not doing
mm.
it, then it definitely isn't getting fixed.
And truly, Rob, no person does it alone. We're conditioned in our capitalist society to think that our specific successes or heartbreaks are our own to bear exclusively. And not to minimize the experience of any one human life, which is a beautiful meditation on possibilities, right? Whatever the human life entails. But absolutely, we are a species built on collectivism. Even if socialism is used as a boogeyman in 2022, this idea that we care for each other and that we hold each other down, and some days we're fucking tired and need to take a nap, and somebody can come along and say, you know what, Rob gets to rest, Andrew gets to rest, we're going to hold down this rally or this action in their stead. And then collectively we look back on our lives and say that truly we did not do this alone,
Yeah,
and nobody can and nobody will.
I love that. And I just think I've heard people say things like that who may identify as straight. That the idea of that it's not
Well,
exclusive to us, but I do think there's like something about queerness that
yeah.
I've felt what you're saying in a different
Yes.
way and really been part of communities, especially of more diverse communities than I had
Wow.
been part of, where I really like got to know people in different ways and support each other. And so like it's not a uniquely queer thing what you're saying, but I do think it's intertwined in some way.
Wow.
And the way you said it so eloquently, I'm sure it's been building inside you as you've been on this bi journey.
Wow. To know I do have my biological family. I love them even when we disagree. But this chosen family that has sustained me
Hmm.
since 2018. And folks who probably saw this within me, saw this limitless capacity for love before I knew how to articulate it, right? And who patiently journeyed with me and who now celebrate me and hold me with tender care. That is this piece of the journey that is indescribably, I have to say it again, freeing. And that gives me hope for the present and the future, and lets me know that there is optimism to be felt in times of despair. And we'll pray for those straight people,
Yeah. Some of them will get it at some point.
Absolutely, and there's so many like straight folks, right? And look, I ain't shit because I was 26 when I came out, but they straight for now, But
Yeah.
let's give them a decade.
Yeah, exactly. Got to get all the Republicans to listen to this
Oh,
podcast, and maybe that'll change their mind. Once I convince them to go to a sex party, then they'll rethink everything.
I think Jabuki has a joke who I love, Jabuki Young White.
Uh
He's
huh.
like He's like, I'm not like cute enough to have like a modeling career, but I'm cute enough to ruin a Republican senator's career.
Yeah, exactly.
Same, Jabuki.
Well, on that note, and seriously on the lovely note about the limitless possibility of love, or the limitless capacity for love, thank you so much for being here. And also, everyone, please go vote. If you didn't vote already, I voted early. Andrew voted early. You got today that this podcast comes out, and you got tomorrow on election day. Please get out there and vote. It won't take that long, and hopefully, and it's incredibly important. Any other final message on that, or anything you want to say?
This was the best day of the year. Thank you for this life-giving resource of this conversation, and hold on to hope, y'all, and to each other, right? Vote in the midterm, certainly, and let's keep fighting regardless of the result on November 8th, 2022.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It was great to finally meet you and chat with you.
See you real soon.
Two Bi Guys is produced and edited by me, Rob Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. We are supported by the Gotham, and we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network. Use promo code 2BiGuys to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr. Thanks for listening to 2 Bi Guys.